Today in Matt's class, we are going to talk about aspect ratio. So what are we talking about with aspect ratio? Aspect ratio is simply referring to how wide your screen is compared to how tall it is. Now that has nothing to do with how big your screen is, because let's face it, the aspect ratio of your phone could actually be exactly the same as a giant movie screen that you're looking at. And sometimes you'll notice different aspect ratios if you're ever watching something on YouTube or on TV where it's got the black bars on the top and bottom, making the screen a little bit wider. Or if you're watching an older show from television, you're watching that and it's got the bars on the side. That's kind of making up for having a different aspect ratio. Now there's a lot of different aspect ratios that you can use. I think there's over 24 that people use professionally, but I want to talk about the 4 that you kind of see over and over and over again that you might be using professionally soon in your career. So here they are. Here's the first one. So the first one looks a little bit like this, and this one is called standard. Also, sometimes people will refer to it as 4:3 or 3:4. And the official aspect ratio is actually 1:1.33. So if you're ever looking on the back of a DVD or a Blu-ray and you've got something at this aspect ratio, this is usually the formula that you'll see right here. This was actually created with the advent of 8mm film. So this is kind of where film began. Where do you see this aspect ratio being used? Anything that's like old school television, old school TV. So you don't see it as much anymore with a lot of actual film programming or animation. However, it's important to know there are still some formats that use this, including the iPad and the iPad Pro. Also the Nintendo DS uses this format. So if you ever wanted to create your own storyboard templates using this aspect ratio, very easy. All you have to do is make them 3 inches tall by 4 inches wide, and that will give you standard aspect ratio. We call it standard because this is standard def, and that's the first aspect ratio. Next up, looks a little something like this. This one is called European Standard Projection. The official aspect ratio for European Standard Projection is 1:1.66. What this means, by the way, in case you're curious, right here with standard definition aspect ratio, you'll notice that this is 3:4. What that means is it's 3 parts tall for 4 parts wide. Or this aspect ratio is actually the same thing. What this means, this 1:1.33, it means if this is 1 part tall, this is just a little bit wider. It's a little bit wider than a square. So that's like 1 1/3 wide compared to 1 tall. So that's why the aspect ratio is 1:1.33. European Standard Projection is a little bit wider because it's 1:1.66. This was created with the advent of 16mm film. Where do you see this? You see this with a lot of foreign films, also art films, student films. And the reason why, film is super, super expensive. And 8mm film is the cheapest, but the negatives are so small, it's really easy to see scratches and dust particles. This is a little bit bigger. Again, it's not the best quality, but some people just really love the look of film. And so 16mm, this will give you the aspect ratio. You'll also, I think up until recently, even iPhones were this aspect ratio, I believe up until the 4. And then it switched after that. But if you ever, for some reason, need to create something in European Standard Projection, I think some laptops are also this aspect ratio, but again, it's constantly changing. But if you do need to create storyboards in this aspect ratio, it's 3 inches tall by 5 inches wide, and that will give you 1:1.66 aspect ratio. This one's called America.
Heck yeah.
American Standard Projection. And this is 1:1.85. This was created with the advent of 35mm film. Where do you see American Standard Projection these days? Almost everywhere. And honestly, thank goodness for that, because it's such a pain when you release either a video game or a movie or some kind of product that's on one aspect ratio and then it gets released on something else that has a different aspect ratio, because then it's got the crazy bars and you want to make sure it doesn't stretch funny or people look squished. So keeping things the same aspect ratio, in my opinion, is super, super helpful. So almost any flat screen TV, a lot of computer monitors are this aspect ratio. Most phones these days, most smartphones are this aspect ratio, and it's super helpful that they do that. If you ever need to create your own storyboard templates that are this aspect ratio, very easy to do. Once again, 3 inches tall by 5.5 inches wide, just a little bit wider than European Standard Projection, and that will give you the official aspect ratio for America. James?
Heck yeah.
Thank you. Standard Projection. Okay, so there is one more that you see quite a bit, and it looks like this. This one, it's a little bit wider, and it's called Synescope Widescreen Projection. The official aspect ratio for this, it's actually more than 2 parts wide. So this one is a whopping 1, for it being 1 part tall, colon 2.35. This was created with the advent of 70mm film. Very expensive. Where do you see Synescope Widescreen Projection? Most of your box office blockbusters. Here's the reason why. Film, again, is super, super expensive. So this is whenever you have a film that Hollywood studios are really banking on. They think it's really going to do well, so they'll fork over the extra money to have this filmed in 70mm film, Synescope widescreen projection. So all of your Star Wars movies are filmed in this aspect ratio. All of your Lord of the Rings movies, all of your Indiana Jones movies. A lot of the Marvel movies now are in this aspect ratio. That wasn't always the case. Anytime Hollywood is banking on a movie and they know it's going to do well, usually it'll be in this aspect ratio. If you wanted to create your own storyboard templates using Synescope widescreen projection, very easy. Once again, just 3 inches tall by a whopping 7 inches wide, and that would give you Synescope widescreen projection. Now, some interesting stories kind of around this. If you kind of follow these, this is kind of the history of cinema, because it began here and you can see it keeps getting wider. And the reason why we've kind of learned over time, because we have eyes on either sides of our head, we enjoy things that are much more panoramic, and having a much wider view kind of fills our peripheral vision a little bit more, and it just kind of places us into the action a lot better. Wouldn't really make sense to have a movie like this with a screen like that, because then you're just constantly going like that, moving your head. It doesn't really work as well that way. Another interesting thing about aspect ratio, the very first Spider-Man movie that came out, directed by Sam Raimi, starring Tobey Maguire, that was actually filmed in American Standard Projection. So this was the aspect ratio. However, that movie went on to become the biggest money-making movie of the year. No one had any idea that the Spider-Man movie was going to do that well. So when it came time to making Spider-Man 2, even though it was the same studio, the same director, the same actors, the studio gave them the money to do it in Synescope widescreen projection. So it's really weird if you ever watch those 2 Spider-Man movies back to back. It's strange because the first movie looks like this, and then when you get to the sequel, it's in a completely different aspect ratio. Why? Just because they had money to throw at it and they figured, why not? Let's make it Synescope widescreen projection. To me, I like my series to kind of stay the same, so it's a little awkward to me, but hey, it is what it is. There is a difference between what creative types will refer to with aspect ratio and then people that work in screen industries. So for example, if you're working in film or television or animation, whenever you're referring to aspect ratio, you're going to use this format right here, 1:1.85. If you look on the back of a DVD or a Blu-ray or anything like that, that's the aspect ratio you're going to see. However, if you work at Best Buy and you are selling people TVs, or you work at a home theater where they're selling movie screens and whatnot, instead of calling this 1:1.85, they will refer to this as 16:9. And that is actually the same aspect ratio. It might be a hair off, actually, if you figure out the math, but it's super, super, super close. This is the size of the screen, or this is the size of the flat screen TV that they will sell you. So a lot of computers are 16:9 is what they'll call it. This right here, they'll call 3:4. Again, if you're a creative type and you are creating animation or you're creating apps or anything like that, you're going to refer to this aspect ratio. Why they're different, I have no idea. Sometimes there's a little confusion there, but one is for the creative industry and one is for the format industry, for how this is going to be released either on screen or projected onto a movie screen. Some people ask about IMAX. What's up with IMAX? And that's actually kind of a very strange, curious thing that's kind of happened over the years. So traditionally, IMAX footage, the negatives are actually this aspect ratio. It's actually 3:4, but it's a large, large negative. And the larger the negative is, the less you have dust particles and scratches, so you really have a nice clear picture. And for IMAX screens that are very large, it's very helpful to do that. So when they started IMAX projectors and IMAX theaters, they boasted that an IMAX screen is 7 stories tall. So I remember as a kid, the first time I saw an IMAX movie that was on an IMAX screen, it was at the Henry Ford Museum near Greenfield Village. I remember going in, sure enough, 7 stories tall. Wow, how amazing in this. The only thing that's a little strange is, even though it's super tall, it's not as wide. So you can, even though it fills up your peripheral vision this way, it doesn't really fill up your peripheral vision this way. So it kind of defeats the purpose, being really tall like this, but not as wide like this. So here's the interesting thing. IMAX started losing money and they needed to find a way to kind of combat this. So what they did, they started releasing regular movies that you could see in IMAX theaters. The only problem is, the negatives are so big, the reels that hold the movies, they can't actually hold more than 2 hours. So I remember years ago when Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones came out, they also released it in IMAX. So I thought, oh my gosh, I have to see this movie in IMAX. Now that movie is normally 2 hours and 6 minutes long. So when I went to go see it in IMAX theaters, I was kind of gypped because they had to cut 6 minutes out of the movie. Not only that, Star Wars Episode 2 was filmed in Synescope widescreen projection like this. Now to release it in IMAX theaters, in order for it to be in this aspect ratio here, they actually had to cut off part of the sides in order for it to fit on the screen. So yeah, you saw it nice and big, but you lost 6 minutes and they trimmed a little bit off the side. For a Star Wars fan like me, that is sacrilege. Even worse, a few years later when a movie came out called Batman: The Dark Knight, that also was released in IMAX theaters. However, if you paid the extra money to go see it in IMAX, that movie, I believe, is 2 hours and 36 minutes long. That's right, that means if you paid for it in IMAX, not only did they crop off the sides and you missed everything over here and everything over here, they took out 36 minutes of the movie just so you could see it in IMAX. So a lot of people complained about that, and so IMAX made a smart move because obviously they can't, there's nothing they can do about it with the projectors. So IMAX got smart. They decided to start licensing their name so that any theater could have an IMAX screening room in it, but in the complex, the IMAX theater has to have a room that's at least 5% larger than any other theater in its complex. So for example, for those of you that live in the Detroit area, there's the AMC Forum 30. One of their theaters is the IMAX theater. I think it's Theater 14 if you've ever seen a movie in there. And when you walk in, it's true, it is a ginormous room. It's got a very large screen. But if you go next door into Theater 15, that is not an IMAX theater. But if you go in there, that also is a very large, ginormous screen. It's not 5% larger like the IMAX one, but it's still pretty big. and it may not have IMAX superior sound, but you know what it does have? It has Sony Digital Dolby, and other theaters sometimes have Lucasfilm digital surround sound. Once you're digital, like, the sound is pretty darn good, and it's got the beautiful surround sound. Plus, here's the other crazy thing. When you're paying for IMAX, even if you're seeing it in this aspect ratio, what you are watching is pixels. It's all digital now, and it's all streamed via satellite. So you're not even looking at the actual IMAX print. You're not looking at actual film anymore. You are looking at pixels. So at the end of the day, what's the difference? There actually is no difference. You're paying all that extra cash just for the IMAX brand, the IMAX name, when really, if you're watching something in any of those theaters, it's all digital, it's all large and in charge, it's all superior surround sound, it's all amazing, but some people will still pay the extra money to see something in IMAX. But that is kind of the history of where it is. True IMAX is actually this aspect ratio when we are talking about the film. So that is aspect ratio. Get to know it, learn it, love it, and figure out what you're going to do for your projects utilizing the different aspect ratios. Did you enjoy class today? If so, give me a like. If there's something you'd like to see me cover in a future video, let me know what that is in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I've also got a video series called Sketchbook Challenge that helps your drawing, creativity, and fill up an awesome looking sketchbook. Plus, there are videos on You Can Draw Star Wars, Hollywood is Dead, and sneak peeks at the Aladdin 3477 Motion Picture Trilogy. In order to not miss any new videos, hit that notification bell. Sharing is caring, and it's great to inspire your friends. Share this video on social media and your friends will share awesome art tips they find with you. If you're on Instagram, you can follow me at Matt_Busch_Instagram. I'll see you back in the classroom soon. Don't be tardy.